Here are some tips that will help you keep your bonsai alive and really healthy before, during and after repotting it. My name's Dave and you're watching Blue Sky Bonsai. Stay tuned. Before we get started on my tips for healthy repotting, we need to be clear on what the goals of repotting actually are and when to do it. And on that subject, if you haven't already seen it, please watch that video where I explain the reasons why we do repotting and when the best time to do it. And a spoiler, it's spring. But you can also repot in summer, from spring right through to summer. So let's get started on these tips. And the first one is, in some ways, common sense. It is prepare your stuff beforehand. But one of the things you should prepare is a water spray. So here are the tools that I use. You probably don't need all of these, but when you've got a lot of trees to repot, it helps. I unpot in a bucket to collect the old soil, and I use either a spatula or a repotting knife to ease it out of the pot. To remove the soil, I use a root rake, or for bigger root systems, I use a root hook. For root pruning, you'll need some pruning scissors, and make sure you've got that water spray so that the roots don't dry out at any stage. For potting it up, make sure you've got your fresh soil ready and something to scoop it with. The wire is for holding it still in the pot for the first couple of months, and the pliers are for twisting the wires together. And finally, get a chopstick to poke the soil down into the roots. Or for bigger pots, a big rubber hammer does the trick. Don't water your bonsai just before repotting it, because firstly, it doesn't need it. If you've got the spray handy, you can keep the roots moist. But more importantly, when you're trying to get all of that old soil off the roots, it's actually more difficult if it's kind of wet and sticky on the roots. So here's a good example that needs to be repotted. It's a boxwood that I haven't done for 2 years. It's already budding out handsomely this spring. And in winter, the pot actually broke. That's a bit of a shame. So I've got a couple of new pots to choose between, and we'll repot it now. Let's just start by removing the wires here from the mesh. Okay, see how easily it comes out the pot now. And pretty easily. Just put that out of the way. And you can see this is becoming pot bound. Thick mat of roots at the bottom. Very healthy, they're all healthy looking roots, but you can see by now they're actually sort of vying for space all around there. So good time to repot it now. I'll take out the drainage screens, you can reuse these in the next pot. Now the moss is so lush and thick. Look at that, it's just coming off in my hand, it's beautiful. Let's put the tree down. That is wonderful. Wow. I'm going to store that away. Now it's a case of just raking away that soil, seeing how the roots are. Rake. You need to rake radially outwards away from the trunk. On one hand, because that helps to remove the soil from the radial roots. But on the other hand, it also helps to untangle the roots and straighten out any roots that are perpendicular to the trunk or winding round. The remaining moss that's here on the tree, I do want to take off the trunk. When moss creeps up the trunk here, it has the effect of making the bark stay humid, and when the bark stays humid and damp, you don't get this nice old crinkly look to the bark. So it's a good time to prune the roots of this boxwood, because I haven't done it for 2 years and they're looking pretty healthy, but obviously it was getting pot bound. The roots, you can see they grow like noodles in the bottom. So yeah, this really did need repotting. Let's see if we can just rake out the rest of this soil. Now, there's lots of very good reasons for using granular soil. One of them is because it allows much better drainage through the roots, and so you're always getting oxygenated water every single time you water the tree. And that's much better for root growth and much better for the whole tree. But another reason for using granular soil like this is because it does come out easier. It's much easier to comb out the roots, to rake out the soil from the roots. Let's turn the tree upside down, have a look underneath. Now what I'm going to do is put the rake right into the middle and rake outwards. So we're still getting rid of that soil, doing it outwards from the centre. Now this is such a good healthy root plane at the bottom, and the flatter the root plane, of course, the better the nabari, these surface roots, and the shallower a pot you can put it into. Beautiful, lovely roots, just coming right down from the trunk. Right, so here's my root pruning scissors. We're just going to start with this one that's coming sort of sticking upwards from the nabari. Let's prune that one off. This long one, let's just prune it down to about here. You can see it's a fatter root, and it does have feeder roots coming off it, but that big long fat root is not actually helping. And here's a few more similar ones. I'm actually just going to do a bit of a profile cut just there. So we've got quite a few of those bigger, fatter roots out of the way. Another one here. So you see a fatter root here, and it's coming straight down from the trunk base. And we want to avoid roots that go straight down from the trunk base, so I'm cutting that one off. Larger roots that go straight downwards are going to cause a problem in the future. Also roots that come down and then go back across the bottom we want to get rid of too. So that ideally all the roots are coming outwards in a nice radial pattern from the trunk. And here, this whole lot, I'm just going to do a profile cut on those. Now when a fat root is starting to turn into what could be a future nabari, then that bit there could be useful if we want to consider that to be a future nabari. Let's just cut it down to about there. Now, while you're actually repotting, and here is perhaps one of the most important tips of them all, make sure to keep the roots wet at all times. Wet, moist, damp, humid. Use a water spray on the roots, and that's the way you keep them wet even when you're working on the roots. The thing is, if your roots dry out while you're repotting it, the tree's health will suffer, and there is a chance that the tree could die. Okay, so I've got my spray, so I'm just going to spray it to keep the roots nice and moist. Rake out the cut roots. And now another tip on keeping the roots wet. If you need to take a break while you're repotting, you can safely just put the whole root system in a bucket of water and leave it there over lunch or for a couple of hours and return to the work later. On one occasion I've left a tree like that overnight and it was absolutely fine, but I wouldn't advise leaving it for more than half a day, especially in summer, because the water could go stagnant and it'll slowly starve the roots of oxygen, but it's fine for a few hours. Now here's the first pot option. Let's see if it looks okay in there. Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, face the front of the tree like that. Could be. Let's move to another one. Now this one, I think is more appropriate, and I think it looks good. In fact, the green goes too, I think. Let's prepare the pot. You reuse the drainage mesh. Just wiring the drainage mesh to the drainage holes. Right, so the other thing I'm going to prepare is to put a wire actually to hold the tree down. I'm only going to do one wire, but I'll put it in the corners and then we can tie it over after. So an anchor wire is useful when you first repot, but then you can't keep it anchored because otherwise you're really constraining the whole root plane and the root ball. When the roots grow, they need to have room to actually push the tree upwards a bit. And now my pot's ready, and I think that is the front. It's a nice clean side. And I've got my soil. It's a mix of akadama, organic soil, which is sieved pine bark mainly. So they're all granules of about 3, 4, 5 millimeter size. And there's a little bit of pumice and volcanic in there. Just put a base layer on, pile it up in the middle a bit, and then we'll push the tree down on it. Now the other thing, of course, at this stage, we need to see if I need to give it a bit of a profile cut around the edge. This is the front of the tree, so we're going to push it down here into the soil. So here's my wire to tie it down. Need to kind of feed it in between the roots. Really going to make sure that it is going to hold the tree in place for a couple of months, for a few months. So put it over the back of the roots and just twist it round. It's very good. Give it a last spray. Spray the leaves as well. Make sure they stay humid. And more soil. Chopstick. Now we poke the soil right down into the roots. And as we do this, gradually the nabari seems to start emerging again, which is nice. That'll do. Now put the top dressing on. Let's just sprinkle that on the top. These are sort of very fine grain for the topsoil. These are about 2 millimeter size or 3 millimeters max. Now, as you can see, I'm actually not filling it right up to the top. And the reason is because we need to give the roots that space to grow over the next 2 years. Of course, the wire that's holding it down right now, I'll get rid of that in a few months. So there we go. One repotted boxwood bonsai. Now we give it a good watering, put it back on the bench. And the first time we water it through very thoroughly, so we get quite a lot of water draining out of it. After repotting it, put it somewhere in the shade just for a few days. Somewhere where there is light, but definitely no direct sunlight. And mist the leaves quite frequently with a fine spray. And the reason is because you want to keep that moisture in the leaves as far as possible and maybe stop or slow down the transpiration in the leaves while the roots are recovering. If your tree does lose a few leaves, not the end of the world. Sometimes up to half of them might actually start yellowing and drop. If you've done a really severe root pruning and you've really not left much roots at all, then what you can do is actually put it in an incubator for a couple of days, 3 days after repotting. And my last tip is sometimes forgotten, but here we go. Don't use fertilizer for at least a month, up to 2 months after repotting. They don't need fertilizer after repotting, and in fact the fertilizer could actually jeopardize the health of the bonsai. So just steer clear of fertilizer for that bonsai for a couple of months. Thanks for watching, Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. See you in the next video.